and thanks for being here, and thank you very much for being patient with us connecting our new technologies. We just wanted to say welcome, and also if anybody needs any interpretation, please feel free to raise their hand, and we have people available to help with that. COPA, Solidarity Committee on the Americas, we're going to tell you very briefly who we are. We're a local organization, and we work in solidarity with people of Latin America and the Caribbean. We also reject U.S. imperialism and the Monroe Doctrine. And a lot of our actions, we organize a lot of actions, but one of our favorite things to do are informational coffee hours, like the one we're doing right now, so we can learn from people in our community. Recently, El Salvador has been in the news, and our organization, like so many others, we were all appalled to see union member Kilmar Obrego Garcia trafficked, as well as many others illegally, to the notorious mega prison in El Salvador. And we also recently learned that Salvadoran President Bukele, who styles himself as the world's coolest dictator, spent $1.5 million lobbying Trump in his first 100 days. And for that 1.5 million, Bukele was awarded an Oval Office meeting with Trump, a nuclear energy deal, money for the U.S. to help El Salvador pay to expand their mega prison system, and for the U.S. State Department to upgrade travel safety ratings to El Salvador. And that's why we just feel it's so important to have this coffee hour to learn from our community members both in El Salvador and locally, because this is really about U.S. foreign policy and decades worth of context and evolution of U.S. imperialist foreign policy that helped to create the situation that we're currently in. So we're so grateful to have three wonderful speakers here with us today to share their knowledge and expertise. We have Gabriela Santos, and she's coming in from Zoom. She's from the Human Rights Institute at the University of Central America in El Salvador. We have Francisco Segovia, who is the Executive Director of COPAL Minnesota, and we have Brenda Pfahnl. Am I saying that correctly? Sure. Okay, so board member of Cristosal, a Central American human rights organization. And after hearing from all of these wonderful panelists, we're going to have a little bit of time for Q&A. So feel free to raise your hand if you're here in person, or to put your question in the chat if you're participating via Zoom. So our first speaker right now is Gabriela Santos. She's coming in from the University of Central America in El Salvador. She is the Human Rights Institute director there. I recently attended a webinar through Global Exchange where Ms. Gabriela was a panelist about the current situation in El Salvador. And I just really appreciated learning so much from her. And I'm just very grateful that she agreed to join us in our panel today. So welcome, Gabriela.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. So, should I start right now?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Okay,
Great. Thank you. Thank you for your interest in everything that is happening in El Salvador. I mean, it's really sad why we are in the news again, but I really appreciate your concern and everything, your interest in general. Well, we cannot understand the current state of exception and everything that is happening in El Salvador without first acknowledging that there is no rule of law. Power is completely concentrated in our country, and is concentrated in the hands of the president and his circle. There are no checks and balances, there is no due process, there are no procedural guarantees at all, and in short, there is a blatant disregard for democratic principles and human rights in general. The president and his inner circle control every branch and office of the government in El Salvador, and this is not an exaggeration. Bukele won the constitutional presidential election in 2019. And in 2021, when his party won majorities in the Congress, the first thing they did was to remove the magistrates from the constitutional chamber, which is essentially the Supreme Court for us. And also they removed the attorney general, replacing them with people loyal to him. So that's when he had like all the three main branches. He was the president, also he had the majorities in the Congress, and then he controlled all the judiciary branch. After that, the newly appointed judges reviewed the Constitution and all the prohibitions for immediate reelection, and they reinterpreted our articles in our Constitution. More than 6 articles prohibits the immediate reelection. But despite that, he got reelected last year, unfortunately. Um, he also removed and he purged 1/3 of all judges based on age, while publicly claiming that it was to fight corruption. And months later, the state of exception was declared. We've been living under a state of exception for over 3 years now. This month, the 38th extension of the state of exception was approved. Last year we had elections. We every 15 years we elect everything, like presidential elections, Congress, and also all the municipalities. And of course, he changed all the system. He reduced the seats in the Congress. He rearranged like what we know about gerrymandering, and he also rearranged everything uh, in the municipalities. So the only purpose was to control and concentrate more power. So he changed our electoral system, our judiciary system, and he stayed in power. Like we had these elections last year. Also, we had fraud in the election, not in the presidential one, but we did have fraud in the Congress elections. But despite that, we are here with this situation right now when he is, progressing in this concentration of power. Also, in 2022, when the state of exception started, and as journalism and also the Department of Justice said in many investigations, he probably had negotiations with gangs. And these negotiations, the truce that they had ended, and then is when the state of exception started. And we have been here now in this state of exception that is not only used against gang members, as he has said repeatedly, but also with people that have no relations to gang. More than 85,000 people have been detained over these 3 years now. Thousands of them have no connections to gangs. They're not the so-called terrorists that he says, but it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter because, as I said, we have no due process at all in our country, unfortunately. So also, he controls all the narratives and everything that, does someone with this tendency to be a dictator. And if we prove as organization, human rights defenders, if we can prove that they have no ties to criminal organizations with all the people that have been detained, it just doesn't matter. There are hundreds of testimonies of torture inside the prisons, which we never see on TV because they are even more inhuman than CECOT. Maybe you have watched all these pictures and videos of CECOT, which are really bad, but this is not the worst prison in El Salvador. The thing is that we have no access to those prisons. We just know about the testimonies of the people that have been released. And they have, said that torture has been committed inside the prisons. They have watched people died inside of the prisons. And this is a condition that unfortunately no one, no organization can really control or can really, to have this accountability because there is no access to anything in the government. As of now, the national overcrowding rate is at 248%, even with CECOT, because the occupancy rate at CECOT is nearing 40%, so it's not been used in its total capacity. Also, public defenders have been reduced, which exacerbates the saturation and inefficiency of the system because there are no enough public defenders for, 85,000 people. Between January 2024 and February 2025, only 0.20% of habeas corpus cases were favorably ruled. And I'm not saying that all of the habeas corpus should be favorably ruled, but I mean, this is not even 1% of all the cases that are being issued. Also, families of the detainees are left in the dark, I mean, receiving only negative responses, and there is no will to address the major issues. And unfortunately, also, less than 10% of the detainees have been released. Though this does not mean that they have been declared innocent, I want to point that out because just have new measures that they can be free right now, but they are still in the process. And it's not that they are being considered innocent. And as I said, one of the biggest issues is that the state of exception doesn't just apply to gang members, but also to dissident voices, media outlets, independent journalists, human rights defenders, communities, and anyone who might protest against injustice are being harassed and stigmatized. And despite the government's narrative, we do not defend criminals, as he has constantly said. Even Senator Van Hollen, when he came here, he was stigmatized, and all this narrative was imposed towards having a bad picture of him. Also, even the Margarita Gate, and I mean, the only thing that we defend due process and human rights is something that bothers a lot to the government. Last week, everything kind of got deeper in this criminalization because people were detained. One community leader and one human rights defender, and he's still detained. Also, one of the most recent example of this arbitrariness, 2 weeks ago, 14 bus owners were detained without any legal justification, and one of them died in prison due to pre-existing health conditions. But the consequences of these arbitrary decisions are devastating. And when institutions are dismantled and checks and balances fail, no one is safe. And that is the problem we're facing right now. And behind the broad support of the government lies a reality marked by caution, fear of expressing oneself. And despite, because we're constantly asked about the president popularity, but political fear and self-censorship present a significant challenge to democracy. So we cannot say that popularity or it's like a reminder that popular support should not be confused with the well-being of the population and also the full exercise of fundamental rights. So maybe I don't know how much time I have, but maybe I'll stop here to give a space to the other speakers. And if you have any questions, I'll be really glad to answer them.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Gabriela. I'm just reminding people who kind of were filtering in during Gabriela's speech we just heard from Gabriela Santos. She is from the University of Central America in El Salvador. She is the Human Rights Institute director there. And there will be definitely time after our other two panelists to ask her questions and learn more from her. I just also wanted to remind people who just came in that there's food and beverages in the back. Please help yourself. And our next speaker is Francisco Segovia, who's the Executive Director at COPAL, Minnesota. COPAL is a member-based organization. It was established in 2018, and it really improves the quality of Latina families in Minnesota. Francisco is also a parent of students in Minneapolis Public Schools and a local Salvadoran activist. And we're so grateful and eager to listen and learn from you as well. Thank you.
Sure, yeah, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Buenas tardes, good afternoon. I'm Francisco Segovia. Born in El Salvador, came to Minnesota in 1990. So it became home many years ago after living in El Salvador. And so I don't know if there is any specific question that you want me to answer, or just about myself, or.
First of all, it would be great if you could comment, since you're a person on the panel who has so much experience in Salvador and also in Minnesota, and anything else you feel comfortable or necessary.
Okay. So, as many of you know, the history of El Salvador went through a horrific civil war, where many people died and were disappeared. But also it is important to think about not the civil war as the only portion of life of Salvadorians, but it's the pre-civil war and the post-civil war. The pre-civil war is the lack of democracy. It is the repression. It is the idea where you couldn't vote because you already knew who was going to be the next president. And also the lack of human rights and the rights of the organized movements or union members to demand better wages. So many of the things that you will see in the pre-civil war in El Salvador are things that you may begin connecting with what's going on right now here in the United States. The lack of due process, the possibility of being incarcerated. And interestingly, the use of ICE as that force, the immigration police, as that force that is basically going after people's homes and detaining them and sending them to El Salvador, as the cases that you know. But then the whole civil war basically was the idea of the seed of a potential democracy that never consolidated. I think it's key to mention that what we see as the president now is the result of some of those issues that we couldn't solve during the post-civil war, and how this president of El Salvador, in a very smart way, took advantage of the disappointment that people have because of the corruptions that we had with various parties, including the FMLN, unfortunately. And so those are the things that you see is what gave birth to this person that we know now as Bukele. You may connect that with what we have now in the United States with Trump as well. So what you will find very interesting as well with these two individuals, some of the languages that they use, like for instance, when Trump has been asked about returning Kilmer Abrego, he's now saying, we cannot do that because it's a secret. This is basically protecting the state. And we cannot release any information on him. You will see that Bukele does the same thing as well. And so going after the social movements, going after the organized society organizations is something that we have seen in El Salvador, that those many organizations like Cristosal and many others becomes a target. We are seeing that in the United States as well. So keep in mind that when we speak about El Salvador, keep the United States in check as well. Because what you are seeing over there is also happening here. And so with that in mind, as a Salvadorian who is, well, I love my country. I mean, obviously was born in El Salvador, I love my country, and I now for 35 years, Minnesota has become home. I'm pretty concerned about the safety of many people that I know in El Salvador, and I know a lot of people who are activists who are pretty quiet right now. But also, here in the United States, I've been speaking with some friends, and some of us are going to Washington next week, because there is a resolution that is being introduced to demand from the Trump's administration to give answers on relation to the court order to bring Gilmore back. And also to demand from El Salvador to respect human rights. So there is a resolution that already was introduced in the Senate. And so when I was speaking with some friends who are networking to work on this, Salvadorians, right? They said, you know, there are many Salvadorians here in the United States that are so afraid to speak about what's going on over there. Put it in this way, as a Salvadorian, you have two governments. That one can send you back and the other one can arrest you and put you in jail. So that's the situation for many Salvadorians, and obviously what we have now, it is not what happened in the 80s or the 90s where there was an organized, very strong movement, political movement, and there was a very strong organized pro-Salvadorian movement in the United States. Right now, we don't have those things, and we are trapped into these two governments that, again, one can send you home and the other one can arrest you. So those are some of the things that for what I hear from other Salvadorians, and I was speaking with a few recently. They said, you know, we're vulnerable. We cannot speak up. We don't wanna be seen, and I really admire the people in El Salvador who are doing this work, because they can become a target as well. So with that, so thank you, and open as well for questions.
It's important perspective to make the connection locally as well, particularly in Minnesota. And we're gonna also have time for questions with Francisco. But first we're gonna hear from Brenda Pfahnl, who is, I hope I got that pronunciation correct. She's a board member of Cristosal, which is a Central American human rights organization. She is an immigration attorney, a former student activist with CISPIS, the Committee in Solidarity with the People of El Salvador. And then most recently, she is a part of 3 electoral observation missions in El Salvador with CIS, Centro de Intercambio y Solidaridad. So we'd like to welcome Brenda, and thank you so much for being here.
Thanks. I'm trying to think of what I can add to what has already been said, which is really important stuff. I really do want to amplify everything that Gabriela said. If she hadn't said it, that's probably where I would have begun, because I think that what's front in our minds in the United States right now, of course, are the Venezuelans who were sent to El Salvador. But for the last 3 years, there are 85,000 Salvadorans in the prison system. And I was trying to call attention to that at the same time as talking about the situation of the Venezuelans being sent, which is also horrific and criminal. And really, it's just disappearing people into a prison in a foreign country, and it's unthinkable. But with that reality, I always want to point out that there are 85,000 Salvadorans who haven't had any due process, and many have been there for 3 years now. And so I'm really glad that Gabriela began with that information. It's really important. And I think she said something really important too. She talked about CECOT, the mega prison being actually the best prison in El Salvador. So a little bit about the best prison. It holds 20,000 people. All right, it holds 40,000 people, but there are about 20,000, 15 to 20,000 being held there right now. Each cell block holds 156 prisoners, and it's made up of these 4-level metal bunk beds, 4 levels high. no mattress, no bedding, you lay on a hard metal bed. The lights are on 24/7, you are in your cell block 24.5 hours a day. I mean, it's pretty horrific, that's the good prison. People are actually fed there, I guess that's what you could say is good about it. And it has a lot of attention to the international world, so, you know, it's maybe a little bit less likely to see some of the most horrific human rights violations that happen there and happen even more so in the other prisons across the country. So that's the good prison, and, largely, gang members who Kelly has had, a relationship with, have been sent to the good prison, and the folks who are less, don't have that kind of credential, haven't worked with Kelly, are in these other prisons. So I think that there's a lot of suffering going on that we're not seeing, that no one is seeing, no attorneys getting to see their clients, family members aren't able to talk with these folks. That's going on as well. But I will talk a little bit about the Venezuelans who were sent, and just a little bit, because Cristosal is an organization, we've been in existence for 25 years. This was the 25th year. It began in El Salvador, and about 6-7 years ago, at the beginning of the Biden administration, expanded operations to Honduras and Guatemala as well. But the main office and the main work of Cristosal has always been in El Salvador. And when the Venezuelans were sent there, right away, family members of the Venezuelans began contacting Cristosal as one organization that might be able to help them and help their family members who are being held there. And so Cristosal has been receiving information from family members, and I think what the best number that I've heard that I know of is that there are 247 Venezuelans and at least 2 Salvadorans, Kilmar and one other, that have been sent on these flights. Cristosal has worked with families of 149 of those people. And of those, 90% had no criminal record whatsoever. So, you know, the claims that our president is making is kind of, you know, doesn't hold any water, honestly. Of those folks, 13% have a disability and over 20% have some kind of chronic illness. So, you know, we're talking almost a third or more than a third of the folks have some significant issues that probably aren't being addressed while being held in CECOT. 41% had some kind of immigration protection here, meaning that they'd applied for asylum, they had withholding of removal from the immigration court, they had temporary protected status, or were here on humanitarian parole, which means nearly half the folks were actually here legally, you know. So that doesn't hold any water as well. And actually 0% of those 149 families are, 0% of those 149 families have had any contact with their family members since they were sent there. So those are really important things to keep in mind. What else can I add? I mean, I think that Cristosal is an organization, like many of the international aid organizations and human rights organizations across the world. When USAID was, you know, cut, we lost 70% of our budget overnight. It wasn't like we're gonna not renew your grant or you're not gonna get a new one. It was like, give us all your money back right now. And so we had to lay off more than 2/3 of our staff, literally from one week to the next, which, you know, and then you have what's happening right after that. And we are, you know, much reduced staff doing, you know, more important work than ever, doing more work than ever. And I think it's been a challenge, to say the least. I say that because I think as you sign in today, we're gonna maybe add your list if that's your names, if that's all right, your email addresses to our mailing list. You can always get off it with an email, and I'm happy to do that. But we just keep wanting to amplify the work that's going on there, what's happening in El Salvador. So if you start getting emails from Cristosal, that's probably why, as a heads up. Cristosal is interesting in that because, like Francisco said, there's really no political opposition that has a voice right now in El Salvador. And so, like, the press always wants a point and counterpoint when they tell a story. Who do they go to? Because there's no political opposition against Bukele. They go to Cristosal these days. And so, out of, you know, fighting for, you know, to be heard in the press is always a challenge for any organization, human rights organization, activist organization. So, but after what happened with the Venezuelans in the month of April alone, Cristosal was quoted something like 200 times in the press, both nationally and internationally. So out of nowhere, we have this temporary moment where I think that the name Cristosal may not be remembered, but of the counterpoints that are being talked about in terms of what's going on in El Salvador, a lot of that is the press talking to Cristosal and other organizations like the UCA. I think that it's, really important to be there and have that voice in this time. And well, it's also just a very challenging time because we have so much less staff than we had, before January. And with that, I think I'll, happy to answer questions. So.
Another huge thank you to all of our wonderful panelists, Brenda, Gabriela, and Francisco. We wanted to take a little bit of time to open up to for Q&A. And we also might have another comment from Niger, who is also Salvadoran, who lives in the Twin Cities. So I'm wondering if anybody in person or on Zoom has questions. If so, please raise your hand and we'll take turns.
My name is Dwayne Crockett. April of 1989, I made the first of 6 trips to El Salvador and went to UCA and had a wonderful talk with one of the Jesuit priest professors there. And it was 7 months after our visit, 6 of the Jesuit priests were murdered by the Salvadoran military. And I was wondering what's going on with UCA today. Is it protesting? Was it being persecuted?
And I think anybody who feels comfortable answering that, feel free.
I'm assuming that
Okay,
Gabriela. seems to
yes,
connect.
we will be answering each question or
Yeah, if you feel
okay.
addressing that
Okay,
question.
great. Well, thank you for your question and thank you also for your concern. Well, like I said, no one is safe right now because, all the power is concentrated and the university has always had this voice, against the abuses of power that happened in the Civil War, where in the 1989, the 6 priests and 2 women that helped them were murdered. And now again, the university is facing difficult times because is being constantly harassed, not only the university, but any voice that, kind of say something again against all this abuse of power and everything that is happening right now in El Salvador. So a couple of years ago, because we have a new rector right now, but a few years ago, our rector was called to the Congress because of a commission that was created in the Congress, because they wanted to investigate what was happening with NGOs and the use of public money in the NGOs. We are a university, we're not an NGO. So it didn't matter. He was called in this at the Congress, but right now what is happening is constantly harassment in, social media and everything that we say that is used by the government to stigmatize also. And last week, what happened is that this community, it's a little bit hard to explain the whole process, but the thing is that community leaders and one young attorney was detained, and because they were fighting against a mobilization, a forced displacement of their homes, and they were protesting, and they have a big doubt to one person that kind of scammed them, and like an answer, it was vengeance from the president. He said that they're going to pay the loan and the debt that they have through this Ley de Agentes Extranjeros, which is a law that what wants to do is to have this 30% of cooperation from international cooperation to go to taxes and take this 30% from all the cooperation and donations. And he said that the debt from this community is going to be paid through this 30% of taxes that come from international donations. This is a law that is in Nicaragua, Venezuela, Russia, these type of countries that are really known by their democratic principles and respect of human rights. So that is what is happening right now. This law is probably going to be approved next week on Tuesday, probably. So these affects, I mean, we're not an NGO, but of course it is, it is going to be consider universities, NGO, journalists, everyone, because it is not made to control or maybe it is not, it doesn't have a good purpose. It just wants to control everything that, people are doing, human rights defenders are doing. So right now, the short answer is yes, the university is facing this difficult time, these challenges. But as we have always done, it is our duty to keep denouncing what is happening, keep saying all this abuse of power and be in the side of the victims, all the victims of human rights violations, and that is what we're doing right now.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Gabriela. We do have another comment on Zoom from Niger. Niger is Salvadoran. He lived in the Twin Cities for many years. He was a leader with Hands Off Honduras, MIRAC, FMLN Minnesota, until when he migrated to Canada in 2011, along with his companion Sonia. He's visited El Salvador numerous times since moving to Canada, including recently. So I believe he's commenting from Zoom. Niger, can you hear us?
Yes. I just want to thanks everybody for and the committee for giving me this opportunity to speak today. I'm Niger. I used to live in the U.S. for 11 years, and then some of you may know me. I moved to Canada, looking for a better opportunities since I didn't find this in the U.S. I've been in Canada for more than, I think, 14 years now. And I've been traveling to El Salvador, and I have seen how El Salvador has been dealing with this new president, who is the cool dictator, how he used to call himself. And in reality, El Salvador has changed in dramatically in for some people for better ways, for other people for in a really bad direction. We know that freedom of mobility is not taking place in El Salvador right now. People are not enjoying the freedom of mobility and freedom of speech. Even though the first time when I went back to El Salvador, I was a little bit afraid that being involved with the movements, I was gonna be a little bit. I felt hesitant, and knowing that talking about the repressions and the limited of rights that Salvadorians are having in El Salvador can put you in trouble, as well as as my family members. But what I've seen in the last time I've been there, last 2 months ago, I went back and I seen how people are being thinking about like how this government has been limiting their rights, and now more people are seeing willing, even though they face a great risk of persecution, willing to speak a little bit more against the policies that this government has implemented in the last 5 years or so. And what we're seeing from the Salvadorian community in Canada is that this is has a major impact on even though the Salvadorian community is not big in Canada, like in the US, we're seeing that the politics that this president is trying to implement with the gang members, but not just with the gang members, but with the whole Salvadorian society, has created a challenges when Salvadorians come to to Canada to ask for asylum. Canada has created believes that now El Salvador is a safe place, and we're seeing less people coming to Canada to ask for asylum, and that has created a big challenge in the Salvadorian community to force them to go to live as undocumented people in Canada. And we know that Mr. Bukele being close to Donald Trump is just as a way to be against how we see it is that he's been against his own community in the US, those who live undocumented. And people are realizing that I mean, you know, people are being deported every day back to El Salvador is not something that they expected from the coolest dictators in El Salvador. But I guess that's a reality that is hitting a lot of families back in El Salvador, and then realizing that this government has been lying to them, has been fueling hatred among those who think differently, those who want a real change in El Salvador, and people feel afraid. One thing that I really noticed the last time is that the first time that I went back, that was 2015, people were afraid to speak up about the gang members. Now people are afraid to speak up against the policies that this president is implementing. It looks like the power has changed from the gangs now to the government. People are afraid to the government now, and so it is challenging times that we're living now, and for our family members who live in El Salvador, and for those who live outside of El Salvador. So those are my only comments.
Wonderful question. We have a few questions that have come in on the Zoom chat, but we did want to give opportunity to see if anybody in person had a question before we hopped on to the questions on the Zoom chat. Is there somebody, we have a question right back there?
Congrats to your name from Cristosal.
Brenda?
Yeah, Brenda. You mentioned you did El Salvador to monitor elections. Could you give us some information on when that was and what you observed or
Sure. So I was there, so for 3 of the last 4 national elections that have taken place in the country in 2018, 19, and then this past year in 2024, when Bukele ran again, I was there for those three of those 4 elections. And so I think I can talk most interestingly, of course, last year, Bukele ran for re-election as president, even though the Constitution said that that's not allowed in El Salvador. Sounds familiar, right? And he ran, and there were irregularities, as Gabriela mentioned. It was both the presidential election and congressional election happening at the same time, and there were irregularities. And so there was a national recount, which was a bit of a circus, honestly. It's really kind of impossible to see if there's fraud going on as you're watching it in real time. But I happened to be stationed the day of the initial vote in the rich neighborhood of Escalon, where Kelly himself votes. And so I, as the head of the prison system, an evil, nefarious figure in El Salvador, and Bukele both came that day, and the first lady came and voted there, and the charade and the just the whole show that was put on. Bukele has what he calls his 7 rings of security, which he literally has 7 different layers of security that follow him everywhere. So that day, the entire voting station was militarized the entire day. He didn't come to vote until just about 2 hours before the polls closed. So before the polls even opened, the first, second, or first 2 or 3 rings, if you want to call them, were already in place, monitoring and walking around the voting center. And then as it got closer to the time that he was voting, you would notice more types of security showing up, both in, in obvious clothing that they were security, and then unmarked folks. I think you happen to just be going in to vote and leave, you might not even notice that they were security, but for those of us who were there all day, it was very clear, they had monitors in their ears and whatnot. But he showed up and he had these big, speakers set up and rock music playing as he walked in, and he had people, party loyalists getting there clapping for him, and it was just kind of a show to say, I am the man, right? And he won with a broad, he is a popular figure, like you're not, like he won the popular vote. But the question was he gonna have a supermajority in Congress? And he needed to assure that was gonna happen. And what was gonna happen when during the initial count of the vote, after that initial day of voting, was that there was gonna be live election results coming in, and he was gonna be showing the country how popular he was and how popular his party was and how they were winning by a landslide, was gonna have this supermajority, but the entire system went down.
Yeah.
And so that's where the recount came into play, because they had no real way to assure that there had actually been, the voting boxes that had closed down had been kept safe and secure and whatnot. In fact, I was in a rural village for one of the earlier votes, and apparently it was like the small schools in the area. Nobody, the election workers are sent there it's like jury duty in the United States. You don't have a choice. You're gonna go work the elections. You're gonna show up at 5 in the morning. You're gonna be there possibly 24 hours or longer, as long as it takes to close down the voting, count all the votes, submit all the votes. And the poll workers at that station were like, we're not staying here after 10 p.m. or whatever, and they all left. And these voting ballot boxes were held there without anyone watching them overnight, and no one really knows what happened to them or who had control of them, for several hours. And that kind of thing was happening across the country. So this recount was happening in the Capitol, and it was just a big show. And it was honestly kind of impossible to understand what was happening and whether, it was all legit, and likely not, honestly. And the other thing I'll say about election observation in El Salvador is, I think it's very true. After the war, that was really critical, because you had 2 parties who really didn't like each other very much, and you had a base that supported both of those. And there was a lot of animosity going on. They had to work together to have these elections, and you're creating an election system that was supposed to be, transparent and work for the first time. And so the observation, having observed there, was really important. But as the years have gone by, a lot of what happens that's nefarious in elections happens before election day, not on election day. And those are things that are hard to observe. So it's often hard to know, what really happened behind the scenes, honestly.
Thank you so much, Brenda. There is another question from Zoom from Jill, and Kim's gonna read that question to us.
Could anyone talk about the living conditions in Salvadorians in terms of healthcare, education, infrastructure, and social services under Bukele, and if that has changed since the FMLN administrations?
Put a perspective on that. I think it's a moment, and I want to say that I truly believe in the struggle of the FMLN. I truly believe that what we wanted was a fair, democratic society. I truly believe, like many Salvadorians, and many who also lost loved ones. And I think it's a moment, and I don't know if this is the moment to reflect on how key it is, because I believe that if you are from the left, you are judged by your moral standard. If you are the right wing, you probably are going to be judged by how much money you can steal, or how many of those dark business you make. But if you're on the left, for whatever reason, we have to have this very high standard moral and live by those morals. Once you lose that, we're in trouble. Because people believes in that as well. Once you betray that belief, we're in trouble. So yeah, I think it's important to keep that in mind. So if this belongs to people, I'm gonna treat this that doesn't belong to me, belongs to people. I believe that when you are on the left, people have some really interesting expectations as well. If you have lived for your country for 150 years of existence and has been a lot of poverty, that because you are from the left, you are supposed to solve those things in your first 5 years of government. That is not possible, right? When there are years and years of lack of investment. So there was this high expectation with the FMLN when they won. But they also were some mistakes. And what we see now, I mean, the El Salvador, the Civil War was not to solve the social issues that we have, was to create the conditions to solve the social problems that we have. So it's important that a revolution doesn't solve the problem immediately. It just potentially can create a condition, the social conditions that allows you to keep moving. I don't think we went too far. I think those 10 years of the FMLN were not enough to be able to consolidate the democracy that we want. Because there were a lot of mistakes as well. And obviously you cannot solve poverty in 10 years. So what you see now, I was in El Salvador, I go to El Salvador, you know, sometimes every year, I wasn't back home. What can you do in El Salvador when your minimum wages are $350 per month? And when you go shopping, you are shopping like you are in the United States, honestly. Imagine what can you do with that? There's not much. When you look at the budget that the Bukele released recently, basically defunded or removed money from education. A lot of schools are closing right now. I'm a teacher by trade. Defunded the public health and even the one they call the Seguro Social, the Social Security, which is basically the workers' own, is basically defunding that as well. But also adding more money to the army. Right? So when you see those factors, what is it that is going to happen is that more people are going to look to leave El Salvador and to work right now. And so the situation, I mean, I was reading a report that they were saying that about 500,000 Salvadorians were going into extreme poverty right now. Now, that's not the story of the diaspora when you go to El Salvador, because as a diaspora, obviously we can go to downtown, that looks beautiful. We can go to places that we can afford. There is this image of El Salvador that is sold and consumed by those who bring daughters home. But it's not the reality for a lot of people who cannot afford their basic needs, healthcare, education, much less, or housing. So what we see now, or what I see now, and when I speak with other people, is that we're having this social bomb that is growing by every moment. Because if people don't have anything to eat, or that system is not providing what they need to have, eventually there is going to be a conflict. Now, let's keep in mind this. The gangs was a huge problem. And many Salvadorians that I speak to, they have these moments of saying, well, the gangs were a huge problem. Honestly, you couldn't go into your community because it was a huge problem. How much time people, regular Salvadorians, how much of that credit is gonna be given to Bukele, or for how long to be able to Bukele to keep operating the way that he is, who knows? We're humans, right? That we have that way to justify things. But some people may keep saying, yeah, but he sold these. Now we can at least do something else. Niger mentioned the fear to police. And it's true, I hear the very same people who say, yeah, now we're not afraid of the gangs because they are in jail. We're afraid of the police. One more thing. And again, I'm trying to connect these two here because you have a population, we have a population in the United States who can justify Trump really easily as well. As much corrupt he can be, or much he can break the law, but they can justify the way that he acts. I was speaking with someone, I went to a conference in Guatemala, Central American Conference, and I was speaking to a few Salvadorians, some leading organizations. And because the system wasn't touching them, they were fine with it. How many of us are okay as long as it doesn't touch you? And so there is a sector in the society who feels like I'm safe now, as long as it doesn't bother me. And I challenged her and I said, so if they arrest some of you, I want to wait until until the police arrest a loved one, that you will react. If many of us are just waiting for that, who is going to be there to support you? And so that's something important here as well, that solidarity that we have among ourselves is so essential, because if we don't do it now, there is not be no one left to support us when we're taken away. So
Thank you, Francisco, for that really, really comprehensive answer. I also know that Gabriela had her hand up and she was gonna kind of supplement that, so we'll give her a chance to respond.
Yes, I thank you. I just wanted to add something to this last thing that Francisco said. The violence that we suffered, but I mean, all this violence, the gang violence has been so severe that it is a topic so important that it helps to maintain also the president's popularity. It is a situation that will be enough for a long time. But that being said, all other rights are not being respected. I mean, schools are closing, hospitals are in bad condition. There are a few, there are less medicines, or there are no medicines at all. People with that have relatives that have been detained also struggle to support themselves and also send money to their detainees. So the situation is really bad because there is no commitment at all to rights, to protect and to solve people's problems. So also on the environmental front, we're doing really poorly. And in general, there is no commitment to rights. But the mere fact of having security has brought peace and hope to people. I mean, they're really hopeful. And I think that hope is going to last for, a while. And yeah, that is a thing to consider. Of course, all other aspects matter, and all the other rights also matter, but this has been such a big issue for us that, just the fact that people feel that they are not going to be killed is enough for now.
Thank you, Gabriela. Brenda's gonna add.
Just briefly, I think it's really interesting too that, if you're relatively young in El Salvador, meaning you're under 40, you don't remember the war. You weren't born yet. Or you were a baby, right? But you do remember the gang activity. And so that's also a piece of, I don't remember what it, I didn't live the time, but it was to live under that repression. And or that kind of organizing, that kind of sacrifice that happened of what are now those parents and grandparents. The younger generations don't have that context. So I had a question actually for you, Francisco. Something that I noticed a lot is families who were involved in the war and were part of the Frente, but they're 60, 70 years old now. And that leadership of the Frente, I felt like didn't want to let go of its power, the party, when there were these 30 and 40-year-olds that were brilliant minds themselves, but really didn't have a space come into that. I think that played into it at all in terms of, like, now we see the Frente hardly, it doesn't have a power base anymore, it doesn't really have the party anymore. Like, what are your thoughts about the future of a political opposition?
That's an interesting question. I keep asking to some of my friends as well. I believe that, happen to believe that in any generation, there is a power struggle between generations, and I think happens anywhere, right? So it's like at what moment there is a time to say, okay, I'm standing down, keep going. I believe that everyone has a space in any struggle. I don't think no one needs to go home and say, hey, I'm old, I need to go home. Nope, because the struggle, you keep fighting for what we believe, right? We believe for justice and until we die, right? So that's what we stand for. But in terms of leadership, I think I'm probably a very much critic of the FMLN. I think there is an important distinction between the people, the members, the base, maybe the ones in the mid positions of power, and potentially the leadership. And so I believe that in any society, if you don't have the systems in place to give the space to others, I mean, hey, come on, we have Biden here, right? Don't forget that we have Trump right now, who is going to be 80. So the importance of knowing when it's time. I honestly don't believe that the FMLN as a party. I don't think that Arena as a party has an option either. But it's interestingly, think about this. And this is what, but again, it can be pretty controversial in some places. Thousands of people supported the FMLN. Thousands of people decided to give a chance. But then there were moments where the leadership was giving positions to friends. I wouldn't say that everyone was corrupt. That would be a lie. But sometimes what happens when we don't have something and we have access to that? What happened in our brain that access to things make us act like the ones that we are trying to defeat? How do we ensure that we don't become our worst enemies? By acting the same way that they are acting. And that we just enjoy the same things as they do. So those are questions that I don't think the FMLN was exempt. And many other social movements are not exempt to that. I believe that El Salvador, right now, the social movement is the key. Look at the University of El Salvador. That was the nest, was the creed of the organized, was a place where you will generate ideas. Many of the people who wanted to change the world came out of that. Now it's totally defunded, or is defunded, and the movement doesn't exist in the way that it used to exist. Now, is everything over? I don't think so. It's a cycle. We went through a cycle of civil war. We went through a cycle of the left governing the country. We went through a cycle of the gains and the situations that we all see. I believe our best investment is organizing the movement, the social movement, as you are, as we all are. Because that is going to be, and eventually social movement is going to figure out a party or something that is going to be hopefully much better alternative than what we have right now. Again, Najib was smart to capitalize on the discontent that existed in the parties in place. And I could connect that to Trump because Trump was able to do the same thing as well. And many, like you have the president of Argentina, he did the same thing as well. So it's a movement that has gone through maybe different places in the world. They are able to capitalize on that. And we need to figure out how we capitalize on their mistakes as well to build the next alternative.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We wanna make sure that there are no other questions. Are there any other questions in person? Yeah, we have another one here.
Yes. As a Protestant Christian, Oscar Romero is a saint for me. And he's now officially a saint for the Roman Catholic Church. And how is the Roman Catholic Church or other churches in Salvador today dealing with Oscar Romero and what he stood for, and what he did to protect the people?
Gabriela, did you want to answer that to start with?
Okay. Well, it has been sad and difficult. Unfortunately, the church here has not had a real voice. The only topic in which the church said something was because of this possibility of have mining again here, because it was this threat and all these environmental things. So the church was silent for all of these years, and until this topic came back again, which, you know, we had a law that prohibited mining on 2017. And it was thanks to, you know, the church and all other, you know, movements that pushed this law and everything, all these activists and and now that we have this threat again, well, it's not a threat anymore. They allowed it. The church kind of gathered no, yeah, 150,000 firms saying that we didn't want mining again here in our country. But that has been the only issue where the church has raised its voice. We have, I'm talking about Catholic Church, and we have other churches, but just, you know, really like, for example, Iglesia Elim, which is another church that has publicly been, you know, denouncing everything that is happening. And one of their leaders, one of a pastor, was detained in this community. He was a community leader as well from Comunidad del Bosque, the Cooperativa del Bosque, and he was detained. This is the only church that has been, you know, publicly denouncing what is happening as well. But there is very few things from Monsignor is, you know, taking place right now. We often kind of think what he should be saying in everything that is happening right now, and we really think that he would be, you know, denouncing all this abuse of power, which is what he did before. And yeah, I mean, it has been really unfortunate, all the things that or how the church has conceived its what the church should be done. But until now that they're starting to speak again, but they didn't before. And we have some priests, you know, Jesuits and other ones that have been publicly denouncing what is happening. But besides that, we do not have like this strong voice condemning everything that is happening right now.
Thank you, Gabriela. We have another question.
I was in El Salvador in March. I was there for the 45th anniversary of the assassination of Monsignor Romero. And just so responsible, Gabriela was saying that yes, the official church is doing what you said, but we talked to lots of people on the ground and lots of people in the villages And every single person, when we said to them, how do you keep resisting? How do you keep going? Protest, every single person. So there's that in the communities, even though the official church is not doing whatever they're not doing. So that's my comment. My question has to do with the United States Supreme Court. And I mean, I've been looking for some even sense of justification as to either from Salvadoran law or from US law as to why it is that people can be flown in airplanes to a prison in El Salvador. Now, I understand there are tens of thousands of Salvadorans also who have no due process, who are there illegally, but this is under US law that they've been sent to El Salvador. And they don't even seem to be pretending to have. I mean, they invented the alien enemy law thing, but that's not what but they're still there. And the court isn't really saying. I mean, they're doing things, but they're still there. They're day after day after day after day. So maybe Brenda or somebody can speculate as to, do you see any trajectory as to where this is going, or where, I mean, I realize. If you're a federal district judge in the United States and you order the Trump administration to do something, that's not easy to do. I mean, I understand it's difficult. So I'm just wondering, how are you reading the tea leaves? Maybe Brenda is the one who needs to take a look.
That's a tough one. Not a constitutional lawyer, unfortunately, but I do think that there is a head that's gonna hit. Maybe not, we're coming to the end of the term right now, but maybe it's next year, unfortunately, where Trump is just gonna outright, not do what the courts tell him to do. He's done that already plenty, but when the Supreme Court gives him a pretty clear order and he just disregards it, like what's the pushback? Like what can be done against him? And that power of pardon for anyone who does it on his behalf is there as well. So there is a big problem. Like I guess in our so-called democracy, we haven't had a point where the president has gone so rogue that we had to question these constitutional issues like we have had until now. And now we're looking at an autocrat's playbook of how you step by step dismantle democracy. And at what point does the court, really challenge him face on, and then what good will that do if he just chooses not to obey? I wish that I had tea leaves and I could tell you the answer to that. I don't know, but I think it's coming. I don't think we can get through 3 years and 9 months or however long it's going to be left of this term without there being a really moment of crisis where we're going to see that something's got to happen, or we've just fallen into clear dictatorship and what's happening.
Thank you.
I just wanted to make a comment on what you previously said. You're exactly right. I mean, this is true. I was talking about the official church, but the communities and people, in really have Monsignor Romero as their guide and inspiration and this powerful voice and leader. So, yeah, thank you for clarify that.
Can I add something more about the Romero? I mean, obviously he's a leader within the movement. Let's keep in mind that there has been so many other faith groups going into El Salvador. And Catholics are, if you're not there yet, soon there will be not more, or there will be a lot less Catholics in El Salvador in comparison to the other faith groups. So that's a reality. So El Salvador has, I think, has the largest Mormon church in El Salvador, close to this very fancy mall. They have the biggest church right there. So, and another thing that I think always puzzled me is when many immigrants, including obviously Salvadorians, we come into the United States, guess what we do? We join small faith congregations. And they have the tendency to be conservatives. If we don't pay attention, which I have been saying to others, if we don't pay enough attention, we are basically creating the base for the conservatives. Because both into small congregations and oftentimes as people, we need that level of support, that level of human care, and you find them in small congregations. But they can be very conservative. And so those are some of the realities that I think is important to keep in mind. Doesn't mean that a small congregation cannot be progressive. Of course, there are progressive ones, but there are very small ones that are not. And El Salvador as a society is also experiencing what Latin America is experiencing in terms of other congregations. Like if you look at Brazil, my understanding is that when Bolsonaro was elected, because a lot of small groups of faith groups, conservatives helped elect him. So that our battles, if you keep in mind that our battles is not about, even the Constitution right now is almost useless in terms of how to use the Constitution to make sure that the law is followed. It is a battle of ideas. It's a battle of opinions. If you have an opinion and you have the people who repeat your opinion over and over and over again, it becomes fact. And it will become fact. What do? You should act on that. That's what we have right now in El Salvador and also here in the United States. We have a president who understands how to use that, repeats that very same thing over and over. And lying is normal, right? I mean, obviously, when George Orwell wrote that book, I mean, it's so factual right now. So our battle is a battle of ideas. How do we generate more ideas? How do we keep making our ideas, our vision of the world, and relating that to everybody else? Because that's what we are doing right now.
We have another question back.
Yeah, just thank you to all of you for speaking, especially, both of you who are Salvadoran for speaking that, and Brenda for your Salvadorian work, the bravery that it takes for you to do that under the situation here in the US and in El Salvador is very meaningful. So I really appreciate hearing from all of you. And I follow Salvadoran politics pretty closely. I've always been inspired by the social movements and the revolutionary movement in El Salvador, going back to when I was in college, a long time ago during the war. I was able to go, and I think even under the situation now where, as people have said, the social movements there are weaker than they used to be, they still exist. Even under the state of exception there, where it's actually illegal to gather in numbers more than, 3 people or something, people continue to go out and protest. Just 2 days ago, there was the march against homophobia in San Salvador, which is quite large. On May 1st, thousands of people marched. It wasn't 100,000 people like it would have been 5-10 years ago, but it was thousands. So people are still organizing, and they really need our support, I think, to continue to do that. I follow a lot of pages in Spanish, but if you don't speak Spanish, I encourage people to follow CISPA's, the Committee in Solidarity with the People of El Salvador, which translates a lot of the communications from popular movement organizations in El Salvador.
And Alfaro does some English work too.
And thank you so much, because that's a really good segue. We were going to post in the chat the information for CISPAS, the Committee in Solidarity with the People of El Salvador, COPAL, Minnesota, Cristosal with Brenda's organization, Global Exchange, MOVIR, which is the movement of victims of the regime, and as well as Bloque de Resistencia y Rebeldía Popular. So we'll be posting a lot of those organizations' information in the chat and send those out, which is
You could send them to people
okay.
who are online, but for people here, I'll just pass this out because it has a lot of.
Great. We have a flyer here too with that information, so feel free to take it if you're in person. Sorry, not on Zoom. And there's also this very interesting article that Brenda brought to share. The judicial black hole of El Salvador's prisons is a warning for Americans. And we have several copies in the back, so please help yourself to that. And there is also a few other upcoming events with some other organizations that are here co-sponsoring, such as Veterans for Peace. We really appreciate their support. And finally, one of the questions that we have for all of the speakers, all of the panelists, is there any other way that we here in Minnesota and those on Zoom can support and move in solidarity with the people of El Salvador right now?
Certainly, you know, Cristosal more than ever needs individual support. Never wanted to be an organization primarily funded by the US government. That's almost a joke in many ways that was a thing for a while, but that support of individual folks who want to be in solidarity with El Salvador is critical. I think that there are many organizations though that need that support right now. In addition to Cristosal, but certainly keep Cristosal in mind. And if you see those emails coming in, if you signed up on the email list, you know, please read, and if you're interested, reach out, be involved.
Well, what's the name of your group?
Cristosal.
Sure, we created a network called the IDN, the Immigrant Defense Network. So that was back in December after the elections, and we were like, oh, what do we do now? How do we build the network? And some members of my team go out, organize a meeting, and we had several people attending. Mira is part of it. Brad goes to those meetings. We're having a retreat coming up in June 26th. So the Immigrant Defense Network basically is a great space for networking and look for common strategies to do several things. One of the things that I believe are key, obviously immigration is a threat to people with or without documents, but also has become a threat for even US citizens. And so that's where we build that sense of solidarity, because if an immigrant lacks a due process, guess what is going to happen to a US citizen as well. And so, but the other thing is that at that network, we're looking at how do we keep reaching out to others who believes that the immigrants are the enemies. Because that's part of the battle that I keep saying to you. We need to keep talking to others. We need to keep building that sense of community and speak about El Salvador. Talk about it. Talk about what is going to happen, what is happening to Gilmer and the Venezuelans. But think about that even the administration here is thinking about, can we send some US born to El Salvador? So keep thinking that what happened over there to Salvadorians or immigrants can eventually happen to any one of you or someone that you know. So this is not about them and us, it's about us together for building that future that we want. Thank you.
Gabriela, did you want to add anything to that?
Yes, thank you. Well, I think solidarity is key. These kind of spaces are also really important to keep talking about what is happening in El Salvador, because we have this man that controls everything, that is being supported by another man that acts in an arbitrary way, that has way more power than the other. And they too, kind of interact in these mean decisions and acts of kind of behaviors and how they act. So I think it is important to keep talking about what is happening here. We have people that were standing for their communities that are being detained right now. So to not stop talking about them, to stand with the victims, and also what Brenda and Francisco have said. And yes, to speak up on what is going on in El Salvador, and not see this like a really weird case, because this what is happening here is being considered a model to be followed, a successful model to have security. So it is being portrayed in other countries from other candidates, even in the US, like we need someone like Bukele. and we really don't need this. I mean, this model is based on distinction of the rule of law and human rights. So we cannot think that this is the way. And so to constantly, have this in mind. Also, I saw that the Senate kind of passed this resolution. Well, the Senator Tim Kaine and Senator Van Hollen wanted to have this resolution towards El Salvador that didn't pass the Senate, unfortunately. But I think in the US, you kind of have more relations with the Congress people and the Senate. So to keep pushing with the people from from your place to demand to what is happening or how they're dealing with the situation in El Salvador, and also respecting something as basic as a Supreme Court resolution. Because the difference right now between El Salvador and the US, beside, the dimension of the country and everything that is obvious, is that you still have independence of power. You have checks and balances right now, maybe not that big, but you still have some institutions that are independent. We do not have that. We do not have anyone here, any institution that we can, ask for to respect due process and human rights. So to keep pushing, to keep asking these institutions, and to keep talking about what is happening in El Salvador, which is not a case that is, so weird, but that, it is being supported by this government which with such power. So thank you again for your concern, for your solidarity, and for your interest in what is happening in this tiny country.
Yeah, I'm sorry, we have Mercy, did you have a comment? We have one question over here too. Did you have a question?
Can I,
Yes, please.
it could be you covered this already, but how many El Salvadorans in Cook County was working with MS-13? And you wound up putting a lot of them to prison, but do you know how many do?
Okay.
Well,
Can they
certainly,
get rid of them for that?
I think the question, just to make sure that Gabriela heard it as well, is that, do we know how many El Salvadorans are aware that, President Bukele was assisting at one point in time MS-13? Is that the question?
That was a
Oh,
question.
Yeah, just a couple of weeks ago, I think it was, El Faro, which is, investigative journalism, journalists that, are originally, based in El Salvador, now more and more they're working from outside of El Salvador, because it's honestly just not safe for them to be there. Just published, and you can find it on YouTube, two 45-minute videos of them interviewing two gang leaders who talk in detail about the relationship between Bukele and the gangs when he rose to become mayor of San Salvador, and then when he broke away from the Frente and ran for president, and how they were instrumental in getting him elected. And I think that news story is becoming much more broadly known in El Salvador. A little bit hard, given the state of things and people's fear of speaking out, how much that's impacted public opinion, but it's certainly had an impact in the country.
There is no way to know. How many people do you think in the United States believes that there was an insurrection January 6th? I mean, honestly, how many people will truly believe that, even if they see it? So, because that's part of the mental game that we have. So that's part of the struggle. People can see something, but that cannot believe it. Because there is a game, the mental game that is happening. And so that's why our job is to keep educating to be able to get to the point where, we can change systems.
I just wanted to add two more things. I mean, like I said, the government controls the narrative. So what happens is that you don't get to the message because you don't believe in the messenger. And like people don't like El Faro, they said, "Oh, these are these journalists that are paid by George Soros, and we are not going to believe them, and we're not going to believe any critic voice, and that is what happens. I mean, like people don't get to the message. Although I have to say that in this, like the most recent publication from El Faro, which was this, they published an investigation that also was in a video format. I mean, they had these three videos explaining the links in the negotiations with the government and the el Barrio 18, this other gang. So many people watched those videos. I mean, it was not this long article, which sometimes is hard to read, but it was this delivers like part 1, part 2, and part 3. So it reached more people than a previous investigation. So it was, I think, another format that is important, you know, to make this so valuable investigation to be to reach other other publics. So when that happened, we have another thing, another big problem in the construction of a highway, really known highway, which is Los Chorros. And he couldn't control the narrative. I mean, people were talking about this investigation. Then this thing in this highway happened because there was this obstruction because kind of some part of the mountain just fell off. And after that, he detained these bus owners, these 14 bus owners, and he declared that transportation was going to be free for the whole week for the whole country. I mean, we're a tiny country, but it happened in this specific highway. And even, you know, this San Miguel and La Unión, which are departments really far away from everything that happened, we're going to have free free transport for the whole week. So this is, you know, populist ways to act in order to have this have these people to talk about everything else but the investigation. So what we have been seeing these past weeks is that he kind of lost the control of the narrative, and he seemed desperate. But the thing is, when the popularity of the president lowers down, the repression is going to high up, which is what we have seen right now in these days. I mean, bus owners were detained because they were not giving the transport, you know, free. One of them died inside the prison. And now we have these two leaders that have been detained. So, and this is probably, you know, these desperate measures to gain back his narrative that he has lost in these weeks. But again, it's really unfortunate what is happening. So I think these investigations and everything around the negotiations with gangs have extended. We have to see how much this is going to last and how it's going to affect other people that were really believing in the president and seeing him as a true leader that was against gangs, just to find out that um he freed them and he negotiated with some of them.
Thank you, Gabriela. I think there was one last request on the Zoom to just repeat a little bit of the information at the beginning regarding President Bukele, who spent $1.5 million recently in Trump's first 100 days lobbying Trump. And Bukele was awarded an Oval Office meeting with Trump that I think we're all aware of, a nuclear energy deal, funding from the US to help El Salvador expand their mega prison system, and for the US State Department to upgrade the travel safety ratings to El Salvador. So that's what 1.5 million got Bukele recently. And then we also wanted to do a pitch before we end for passing the hat for COTA. There was pizza and we any change or extra spare, you know, dollar or two that you have would be wonderful, so we can continue these coffee hours. And also, please don't forget on your way out to grab some of these flyers, the annual WHAM Walk Against Weapons. Dr. Mona is gonna be coming to talk to us about the children in Gaza and also some other great upcoming programs. And Marcy would like to make a comment.
So this is just about a follow-up to this, which is that one of the things that's really important is not to just have a discussion and then everybody goes home and doesn't do anything. So one of the things that we can do is take the whole list of people that are here and online and send people information, because it is important to educate each other. So if you can send stuff to the Solidarity Committee of the Americas that you would like sent out to the whole list, we will make sure that that happens and that people learn about both groups that are active both locally and nationally about different articles like the ones that Rebecca was talking about, and also actions that are happening. So please feel free to contact us if you have anything you want us to send out to people.
Thank you, and we just wanted to take this last opportunity to just say huge thank you to our three panelists who are so brave and who have provided us with so much valuable information. Now we feel like we have to do better groundwork moving forward.
Before we